Horasan dağları karlı dumanlı. 3 ay oldu.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Monster of the Week, the show where we dig up old creatures from past editions of D&D and other tabletop games and bring them to light for current use in your current 5th edition D&D campaigns. My name is Josiah, also known as Dungeon Dad, and today I have the ultimate pleasure of introducing you to none other than the Cat Lord. So what exactly is a Cat Lord? Well, that's a question that D&D has been trying to answer for upwards of 25 years. Cat Lords are entities that reside over all feline kind, and they exist in order to shepherd and protect them. That doesn't mean they can't also have personal goals, though, and there's a lot of really cool ways that you can use this creature. In some versions of the game, the Cat Lord appears as a literal god or demigod-like figure. In other presentations of this creature, they're just a very powerful, almost fae-like being that possesses this inherited title of Cat Lord, which they pass on to another when it's their time to go. In other settings, they're presented as just not a specific individual creature or a title, but as a sort of cast of creatures. So ultimately, the answer is, who knows? All of these things are true, and whichever one sounds the most interesting to you is what the Cat Lord can be. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to explain to you exactly what a Cat Lord is, how they function, how they operate, what type of abilities they have, and then we'll go over some plot hooks, and ultimately it will be up to you to decide how the Cat Lord, or a Cat Lord, makes itself present in your campaign. But just really quick before we get even further into it, I want to say that the version of the stat block which I've created for D&D 5th edition, which you can find in the description as always, is kind of an amalgamation of all the coolest stuff, in my opinion, from the various versions of this creature. So if you want to follow along as we go over its abilities, or you just want to check it out after the video, like I said, down below, that is where you will find the stat block in the form of a Google document. There's a lot to unpack about what exactly a Cat Lord is, but we'll get more into that in the plot hook section of the video. First, we're going to talk about combat and see exactly just what it can do if cornered and forced to fight. Referring to this section of the video as combat feels a little bit incorrect, as most of the time when we're talking about what creatures can do in combat and their mechanical abilities, we're talking about how they fight, because usually that's what the mechanical part of a creature is there for, right? However, the Cat Lord, while it does have attacks and abilities that it uses in combat, also has a lot of just general weirdness going on. So for starters, Cat Lords are shape changers. They can shift between a humanoid form and any type of feline-esque creature in imagination. This ranges all the way from the lowly house cat up to a dire tiger or even a displacer beast. Much like lycanthropes, their stats remain the same between their different forms. This is mostly just so when you're running this creature as a DM, you don't have to have like 30 stat blocks open if it's going to be changing between forms a lot. The only thing that really changes is it inherits the special abilities of any form that it's in. So if it's a displacer beast, it's going to have that displacement trait. If it turns into a Rakshasa, it's going to have their magical abilities and magic resistances. The short answer to what abilities it does and doesn't inherit is anything listed under the traits section of a feline creature is what it gets. The other thing you have to consider here as a DM is what you consider to be a feline creature. I mean, there's the obvious stuff like lions, tigers, house cats, leopards, whatever. But when you get into the realm of the Rakshasa, for example, or a displacer beast, I mean, there you're looking at a fiend and a monstrosity. Whether you count them as falling under the domain of the Cat Lord is totally up to you. I personally would, because I think that's very interesting, but you don't have to. Now, with all of that out of the way, the Cat Lord is a pretty high CR creature. This is partially because it has that shape-changing ability, so it can become pretty much whatever it needs to be given the situation. It's also because it's able to cast some pretty high-level spells. Now, most of the magic that it can cast is focused around kind of social behavior and would not necessarily be used in combat, with a few exceptions such as dominate person. But it's got a lot of tools at its disposal, such as charm person or detect magic, invisibility, that kind of thing. Magic you would expect a magical cat to be able to cast. When it's in its humanoid form, it's generally pretty attractive and charismatic, and it uses that to its advantage. Basically, if you can imagine a house cat the way that it would behave if it were a human being, is kind of how these guys are going to behave. When it's in any form other than its humanoid form, it also has access to a bite and claw attacks, which do a pretty decent amount of damage. So it's going to try to avoid combat if at all possible, but if it gets cornered and is forced to fight, it's going to turn into the most dangerous type of cat that it can, and be using those attacks to claw and bite its way out until it can escape. Or kill the target if it thinks it can. They're also very intelligent, so if you put one of these guys in your games, you're going to get to play them as a very intelligent NPC, which is always fun. However, the scariest thing that the Cat Lord can do is use an ability called Summon Feline Allies. This is where the Cat Lord psychically calls out for aid from the felines around it. What appears is up to you. However, I've given a few examples in the stat block in terms of what kind of monsters and what quantity should appear based on the CR of the Cat Lord. On the high end, we've got things like 1d4 were tigers, and on the low end, we've got things like 4d8 house cats. Summoning a ton of house cats might seem kind of silly, but if it's not a combat encounter, that could have its own purposes. There's lots of different ways you can use that ability. And I like to imagine an encounter with a Cat Lord who is in like a major city or something like that, and it just summons all the cats from the neighborhood to distract the party while the Cat Lord makes its getaway. I've also given it a couple legendary actions which basically just allow the Cat Lord to use some of its abilities at the end of other players' turns just to help it keep up with the action economy. Also, we can't forget the most important ability, which is Lick Wounds, which is a self-heal spell, but it can also heal another creature, so that's fun. The other thing to keep in mind here too is that it does have a humanoid and a hybrid form, so it can wear armor, it can use weapons. So if you're going to use a Cat Lord in a combat heavy situation, definitely try to keep in mind what type of equipment, magical or otherwise, it might be using. Like I said, the Cat Lord's going to almost always try to avoid combat, just given their disposition, unless it's very, very upset about something. And I think just in general, the most common way we're going to employ the Cat Lord is going to be in a role that is more of a social one and less of a combative one. But now that we have a bit of an understanding of what this creature is actually capable of, let's take a moment and talk about some Cat Lords are very interesting individuals, and there's a lot of different ways that you can use them in a campaign to great effect. If you want to treat the Cat Lord as a title, as in there's one, the Cat Lord, that can be a really interesting character. Their stats are likely going to be a bit more powerful than the stat block I've presented, but I'm sure you can think of some fun abilities to tag on if you want to make this kind of a demigod of cats. That's a really fun and sort of silly idea, but I think that it could fit in a type of campaign where you're running in a setting that has a ton of gods, such as Greyhawk, where the Cat Lord canonically comes from. Maybe they task the party with taking down evildoers who are running some type of illicit cat smuggling ring. Or maybe the party's crossed a cat in some way or another and the Cat Lord's coming after them. Or perhaps there's some type of culture that has a temple to the Cat Lord and the Cat Lord actually lives there. Perhaps the Cat Lord is a demigod-like ruler of a pretty big group of Tabaxi. There's a lot of different things you could do by inserting a Cat Lord as a sort of godlike being, and really the sky is literally the limit when it comes to that kind of thing. I think my preferred way to implement this creature, and kind of what I built the stat block around, is the idea that Cat Lords aren't necessarily one individual entity, but just very powerful, almost fae-like creatures that fulfill that role of watching over felines. And again, as for what that looks like, totally up to you. You could have a Cat Lord ruling over a band of Leonin or Tabaxi, and not in necessarily like a god-like state, but just more as like they're the leader of this people. Given their skills and disposition, a Cat Lord could also make for a pretty great master thief. I love the idea of a Cat Lord heading up this thieves guild. And maybe even the majority members of the guild don't even know that the leader is a Cat Lord per se. Or perhaps they do, and the guild uses street cats and house cats all across the city as like little informants, telling them where the best treasures are hidden hidden and how they can sneak in. I mean, you're crazy if you're gonna tell me that a literal cat burglar doesn't sound like the best thing ever. Imagine your party trying to bust up that thieves guild, or maybe even take a contract from them, and they kind of have like someone who speaks on their behalf, and everyone thinks like, oh yeah, this is the guild leader, but they're maybe the second in command, and the actual guild leader is shifted into a small house cat that's just hanging out in the guild tavern, keeping an eye on the party, listening to them before they come in, and hearing every word they say when they don't think that anyone is paying them mind. Like any shapeshifter, there are tons of really fun ways that you can use a cat lord in a campaign, and honestly, these are just a couple ideas that I thought were really interesting, but there are so many possibilities out there. I would love to hear what kind of cat lords you guys can come up with and how you would use this creature in your campaigns. Pro tip: the Dungeon Dad YouTube comment section is a great place to steal ideas. And as always, like I said before, if you want to use this monster, the stat block is in the description below. And of course, if you're one of my lovely patrons, you can get the Monster Manual style stat block that has like the artwork and my write-up on them and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I truly do appreciate it. And if you made it this far, please leave a like. If you're not subscribed already and you want to check out some more wild monsters from previous editions of D&D's history, please subscribe. We do these videos every week, plus other stuff. And if that doesn't sell you on the whole situation, here's one last little plot hook tidbit for free. A cat lord divination wizard who looks at the per tense.